history today, and I want to share something that we're going to draw from Rosemary Ruther's Goddesses and the Divine Feminine, a Western religious history. Now, I had this prepared for last week, but I wasn't able to function last week. So this may not mesh with today's lesson later on. But evidence suggests that during the period of Judges, now this is recorded in the Bible, that during that period that monotheism was not or may not have been practiced. Now, some of you may find that odd. However, it was later that these early biblical writings, what we call biblical writings today, were changed. But at this time, researchers suspect that this was edited out at a later date, which I just said. And I'm not Hebrew, so I'll just go with the English pronunciation, Yahweh, or Jehovah, was identified as El, and oversaw a council of gods. Now, this is actually in Psalms 82. And it was later in the teachings that he became the leader of the host of angels and everything, where they started changing things around. Now, interestingly, they have El, or Ale, as an agricultural god. And Archie Baum, in his book on comparative religions, identifies him as meaning the god of the mountain. Of course, there's more to it. El is just, it's like a surname or something of that effect. Because with Archie Baum, it's El Shaddai, which is God of the mountain. Here, it's just El. And this was also used in Mesopotamian gods, pantheon, and such. So El is quite common. We don't have the rest of it here. We just have a portion. And like many old gods, like I said, he was considered an agricultural god. And there's two versions of this next one, Asherah and Asherah. Asherah is another name for goddess, or in this case would be the consort of Yahweh, El. And the term Asherah, which you will find in Genesis, means altars. And if I recall correctly, in Genesis, they were either tearing altars down that were indicated for the goddess, or they were building them up. I don't recall, but I do know that they are in there. And it may have been later in the Old Testament where they were instructed to tear them down. Because when they changed the writings, when they purged the female aspect out, the goddess aspect, they tore all that stuff down. And they have evidence, at least she records evidence, that in archaeological digs, that they have found evidence of Yahweh and Asherah giving blessings to the people. So at some point in time, God had a wife. To put it more simply, God had a wife. Would anyone like to comment or ask any questions?
Well, you remind me that, in the ancient Egyptians, Akhenaten was the one who introduced the Ra as the god, the one god, and of course, that was all attempted to be erased after he was gone. And if I understand the history correctly, that's where Moses got that idea, and he's the revolutionary thing that he said to the Hebrew people was that the gods are one. And that goes along with what you were saying there. And that was the new big idea that was presented at that time, the time of Moses, that the gods are one. And monotheism, eventually, came out of that. And of course, Christianity is born out of that, as is Islam. So.
I'm reminded that, you know how Amen or Amen is at the end of all our hymns? Amen was an Egyptian god. It's like, well, where did that, how did an Egyptian god get tacked on top of
Amen
that?
Ra. Yeah. Yeah, there's a association in the language for sure.
If
A lot
you,
of cross-pollination.
Yeah,
yes, if you do the research, a majority of religion came out of the Oriental countries, because Christianity is traced back to Judaism, which can be traced back to Hinduism, further back to Zoroastrian teachings. So they all came out of the same general area, but from there, the roots, the branches just came out, but the roots go back to that. Because the same basic concepts you can find in the earliest written religions, which is essentially be kind, to help others, to encourage others. None of this imposition of rules or anything like that. It was more community oriented. So
There's a remnant of that in the birth of Christ story. The three kings, or as I heard in a Catholic church, call them the three astrologers, the ones that were watching the skies and following the sign and came to worship the baby Jesus, all that part of the story. Historians believe that they were probably Zoroastrian in their religious belief, which is a remnant of that relationship that you were just describing. It shows up in the Bible if you know where to look for it and how to read, how to understand it.
yeah, the key is how to interpret it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot in the Bible that you can find in other places. Well, the talk I was going to present drew from Gnostic writings, which were written in the, let's see now, they are saying third, fourth, and fifth centuries. And at that time, the rival of Christianity was paganism. And all paganism are those religions that are not Christian. And Gnosticism, and then of course Christianity. So a lot of the writings are a blending of those three belief systems, which I found very interesting, especially when I am reading about these circles that the early spiritualists conducted. And the teachings that they are receiving can be traced back to, or I should say, you can see evidence of Gnostic writings, Gnostic teachings, which at that time, most of it is from the Nag Hammadi library, which at that time was buried, and pagan teachings, which I found very interesting. So I'm not saying that Christianity creeped away from it. I'm just saying that there are remnants in there and not to throw it out. Any other comments? Then I would like to thank you for allowing me to share that, and Reverend Thomas and Beth for sharing their thoughts as well. who told me last month that he was not going to be here, showed up. I'm not going to complain. Of course, you know, it blows my plants out of the water, but you know, hey, that's life. And I'm sure that's what he's going to share with us, is some lessons about life.
What is there besides lessons from life anyway?
Whose?
Divine Creator, Father, Mother God, we come before you once again with open hearts, open minds, seeking thy divine wisdom and guidance in our lives. May that which comes through your speaker this day be for the highest and best good for all that will hear this message. Amen and amen. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think every one of us have experienced the chill bumps at times. And what does that mean to you?
You're on the right track.
Okay, on the right track?
It's truth.
Truth?
Something I'm vibrating with. Yeah, so it's truth for me.
Something you're vibrating with? Sandy, you got an input?
Something profound, just
Something
something, a profound knowledge, experience.
I've heard some people describe it as it's an indication spirit is around.
Mhm.
My observation has been that this is a common human experience. And that's kind of the point, that everybody gets chill bumps. And it's whatever exactly it is, it's bigger than we may define it. And that's kind of the point. There's some scientific research that's going on, and they're discovering more and more about you know, the way our bodies work and all of that, and the things that we experience. For instance, when they've discovered that there's a chemical released in the brain when mothers that have given birth, and they've found that it's responsible for the bond, the feeling of love and connection with the child. That there's actually a physical chemical responsible for that extraordinary feeling and connection that may be lifelong with mothers and their children. Something that fathers don't have, but mothers do. They've also discovered that there are chemicals released in a man's brain responsible for feelings of love when they experience orgasm. I don't think these things, understanding these things or discovering these things, necessarily diminish the experience, but I find it helpful to understand how these things work, because oftentimes we can take an experience or a limited understanding and go off in a direction that is and not entirely true. To me, it sort of reveals the influence of the creative source of it all, and making this human experience that we're all having what it needs to be. And it's all, you know, baked into the cake, so to speak. One of the things I encountered recently is that in brain research, that our a visual cortex, whatever, if that's the correct term, technically. But anyway, are the visual parts of our brain that we can, you hold your thumb out, that's about 1%. The width of your thumb represents about 1% of the field of view. That is what our visual cortex can see in great detail. The rest of it is kind of a foggy blur. And the thing that we don't notice is that our eyes tend to move around. And every time we move around, we are sampling details, high resolution details, and the brain creates that as one continuous field. Most of what we see is manufactured in the brain. It represents the world around us. That mechanism is probably useful in many ways, including mediumship work. I don't think it diminishes it. I just think it's important to understand it because, again, it is a common happening among all human beings. And depending on how we utilize that, depends on what we do with it. If you watch illusionists or magicians work, magicians are always astounding us with sleight of hand and doing things. And that may tie directly into the limitations of our visual acuity, what we can actually see. If you do something quick enough or fast enough or divert the attention enough, it does not show up in your visual field. Somehow they do these things right in front of us and we can't see them. They discovered many years ago when they started making moving pictures that it takes about 30 frames per second to get over the threshold where it looks like a continuous moving event. You go below that and it looks, you see the flipping of the individual, because all moving pictures are basically thousands or millions of still pictures, one after another, one slightly different than another. But you get past 30 frames per minute, it looks like the reality around us when we're just living life. It's good to understand and appreciate these mechanisms that are built in for us, and it applies to our view of our spiritual world. Anyway, with that introduction, I decided to do something a little different today and share a couple of inspirational writings and to inspire a little thought and discussion. First one is a poem. And the poem is by Dorian Lowe, or Lau. It's called Dust. Copyrighted in 1994. Someone spoke to me last night, told me the truth. Just a few words, but I recognized it. I knew I should make myself get up, write it down, but it was late. And I was exhausted from working all day in the garden, moving rocks. Now, I remember only the flavor. Not like food, sweet or sharp. More like a fine powder, like dust. And I wasn't elated or frightened, but simply rapt, aware. That's how it is sometimes. God comes to your window, all bright light and black wings, and you're just too tired to open it. Anyone relate? I know for me, so often, inspiration, enlightenment, if you will, that may be too big a word, comes in the early morning hours, in the just awakening, precisely in the way this poem kind of describes, when you're just not ready to wake up. And boy, this is really good. I should write it down. And then I don't. What I have are the scraps of the ones that I did write down. And again, this is a universal experience, I feel. This inspiration that comes from, I'd like to think, some part of the creative source. But it's not just for people in pursuit of their spirituality, but it happens to novelists and musicians, architects, all kinds of people. And it is that commonality that I want to emphasize. It becomes ever more clear to me that what I like to describe as the us and them, that there is only us. That is the oneness we talk about when we discuss it in spiritual terms. It is so easy to fall into the them, and someone that is so different or acting in some way that we find horrific, to not feel connected or try to separate ourselves from that. I feel there's great power in having the connection, in believing in our own potential to be just as horrific. It's how we avoid it. It's how we choose otherwise.